Hey everybody, you are listening to Grace Bond Ministries. Grace Bond Ministries is about sharing the Word of God, having conversations about difficult topics, talking about apologetics, coming together, tackling issues, answering questions, studying the Scripture, doing devotionals. Listen, Grace Bond Ministries has so many different things that we're going to talk about, that we have talked about, we're going to continue talking about. And this podcast is made for someone who wants to know more about the Christian faith, or wants answers to their questions, or just wants to ask questions, or just wants a safe place to talk about things, even things like politics, abortion, homosexuality, hell, or just how do I have strong faith? That's what you're going to get when you listen to Grace Bond Ministries. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you are blessed and encouraged by what we do here.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Grace Bond Ministries podcast. Hopefully you checked out our last one about the He Gets Us commercial. If you didn't, we encourage you to go back, check that one out. But today we're going to be talking about tattoos, whether you should get one, whether they're a sin, whether they're just something up to you as a believer, or what, or like why are you getting them in the first place? And so we just want to answer some of those questions today during this podcast and give you our views on it and give you the biblical view, most important of all. So hopefully you tune in for this podcast.
For it is by grace you are saved through faith, not of yourselves, but it is a gift of God. Ephesians 2:8. Welcome to Grace Bond Ministries. You're talking about tattoos. Me and Christian are back for our March podcast. Christian, we talked about me and Christian were just talking about this. We talked about that He Gets His commercial last time, and we got a pretty decent response. I think Christian and I both. We tried our best to just kind of discuss that whole topic in a calm way, in a respectful way. And I don't know. I would hope that when you listen to it, you're like, well, this guy's just biased one way or another, or that guy's biased one way or another. But we were just honestly trying our best just to dig deep into it. And me and Christian, almost every time we do a controversial podcast like that, it's like we're almost undecided, even at the point where we start recording, of like what stance we're going to take, because both of those are pretty good about not trying to stay away from the extremes of either side of anything, but unless we feel it necessary, of course. But so yeah, it was a good podcast. Christian, what's your thoughts about the last podcast now that we're done and it's been out? And
Man, well, we haven't gotten canceled yet, so that's a bright side. But I think it's gotten, you said 300 views on shorts is pretty good. And then so I think it's got people interested in probably talking about it. Maybe just within their friend group, or maybe there's probably a rare amount of people that didn't see it that know about it now. And I've seen it several times since then on TV.
yeah, I actually had somebody on my Facebook told me that they hadn't seen it.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
She said, where can I find it? I was thinking, well, I guess everywhere. But you can watch YouTube? the whole the whole commercials on YouTube, about all of them that they've released. So
yeah,
but yeah, it was definitely an interesting discussion. And we've got another one here. This is something that the topic of tattoos is something that we it's something everybody thinks about and talks about. We're just excited to share. I know I made a post on Facebook a while back, just asking people what their thoughts were and different things. And so we're going to share some of that. So if you shared your thoughts on the Grace Bond Ministries post, and it's probably over a month ago, and I asked that. But yeah, if you shared your thoughts, I've got them pulled up. We're going to discuss them a little bit, and let's get some of your thoughts, and then we're also going to get into some scriptures, and then really we just wanted to tackle a couple of interesting questions towards the end, like
we're gonna talk about principles. If we won't go that far. But what if you already have a sinful tattoo? That's one question we're going to talk about. At what age is it appropriate to get a tattoo, if it is appropriate? And so we're gonna discuss some of that as we go. And so it's interesting when you get into this is, like Christian and I were talking, the stigma behind it has changed drastically in recent years. And from like people I've talked to, 30, 40 years ago growing up, they would say, a lot of times it was like the only time anybody got a tattoo is if they were trying their hardest to be defiant, like trying their hardest to be different or whatever, and just irritate their parents and the authorities in their life or whatever. And of course now people just do it because they think they just like the way they look or something. So, there are some things that are still around, and there's still a discussion that's going on. And I know Christian and I are both Southern Baptist, and so we're typically around Baptist people. But we're kind of around all kinds of people. But I know one of the toughest, I don't know how to word it, but one of the groups, denominations, I guess, that are really strongly against this, like almost unanimously, or the Independent Fundamentalist Baptists are. They're pretty hardcore against it, and we're going to talk about some things and arguments they make and stuff. But so it's interesting. And Christian, what are some of because I know Christian actually had looked into a couple of other religions and things and to see what they thought about it. But what did you come up with that, Christian?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I've talked to people at my church before that they've talked about, like, the military people. They all got this specific tattoo back in, like, he had a specific Navy tattoo. Almost every person in the Navy got that specific tattoo. So it's interesting to figure out some of their reasons or stories behind them. But as far as different religions, the Catholics, which is connected to Christianity, but the Catholics are good with it. They said Pope Francis once said that tattoos can just lead to good dialogue, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And Hinduism, Buddhism, they allow tattoos both culturally, religiously, and then Muslims believe it's a sin because they look at it changing the natural creation of God. So probably a lot of piercings, they believe the same thing, where you're changing the creation of God. And they believe that to be a sin. I forgot what term they actually used. So it's interesting that out of all the different religions, you just have a couple sects of Christianity and then the Muslims that believe it to be a sin. We talked about the Muslims kind of being defiant and getting tattoos. So it's almost like their culture's farther behind or something.
Yeah, it's interesting that the consistency of it is, for people who are against it, is, it's kind of like, hey, God created the body that you're in, whatever religion these people, follow. It's God created this body that you're in. It is a gift. It should not be altered in any way, shape, or form. And of course, a tattoo is a permanent altering, pretty much. And so it's interesting that is the consistency of it. And so for me, it just kind of points back to the pretty clear fact that it's about how people view the tattoo, period.
Yeah.
Like if people think they look good, I don't know, we'll talk about it here in a second, but so let's move on to this question. Does the Bible permit Christians to get tattoos? And before I sometimes I say, does the Bible, should people get tattoos or whatever? But honestly, the Bible is meant for Christians. And so, it's meant for the whole world, but it doesn't, there's really no point of following it until you follow Christ first. So,
for those who are perishing.
Do what?
So it's foolishness to those who are perishing.
Yeah, that's a lot better than what I was trying to say. Thank you. Thank you for saving that.
Verse somewhere.
If you're not a Christian, don't worry about the Bible. It's not that important. That's basically what it sounded like I just said. Maybe we should try this again tomorrow.
Not important to them.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm sure you guys understand what I'm saying. But like
Oh, yeah.
the Bible in the mind of a non-Christian, the Bible does not have authority over their life. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. But for Christians, it does. I mean, what the Bible teaches is what God has taught us as human beings and as Christians, and so it has a very powerful authority over our life, or it should have a very powerful authority over our life. And so, but anyways, long story short is what does the Bible say about it? And so I've had conversations with people that are Christians, and they believe that not only should you not I just want to emphasize should there, because I know a lot of Christians that say you probably shouldn't get a tattoo, but I know a lot of people that say not only should you not get a tattoo, but it's also sinful to get a tattoo. And I remember one guy in particular when I was talking to him, typically they talk about two verses. The first one is a quote from the Old Testament law in Leviticus. It's 19:28 of Leviticus. It says, "You are not to make gashes on your bodies for the dead, or put tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord." And so, what they'll say is it's pretty clear right there in this Old Testament law that we should not tattoo our bodies at all. And there's a couple of things to respond with this. I mean, one is the cultural context about this verse is, tattoos back when this verse was written in Leviticus was written thousands of years ago. There was pagan religions that were marking themselves for the dead. And it was like a sacrifice to their gods to do this when they would mark and tattoo their bodies. And so it was a pagan practice. And so God was calling his people out to look different and act different and make sure that they were not connected in any way, shape, or form to any sort of worship to a false god. And so it's, you hear a lot of people back off of that, I think, and they focus more on the 1 Corinthians one. But Christian, do you have any thoughts on that verse?
I mean, I'm sure their tattoos hurt a lot worse and looked a lot different.
Yeah.
They said it's usually, for them, it was like something of their idol, or it was like branding themselves for that religion. And I mean, you could, for those who try to hold this verse up, it's like, well, did Christ fulfill the law for us, or what? Like, do you wear 100% cotton shirts, or do you not eat bacon because God told him not to eat bacon? So
Yeah.
that's one of those you could just go back and forth on.
Right. And the other verse they use is one in 1 Corinthians 3:16. Now this verse is used for all sorts of things that it wasn't meant for. But verse 16, it says, "Don't you yourselves know that you are God's temple and that the Spirit of God lives in you? If anyone destroys God's temple," verse 17, "God will destroy him, for God's temple is holy, and that is what you are." And so the thought behind this is from these people, and this is one thing, Christian, I want to do to show that we want to show that we understand, we understand points of views that we disagree with. Right. And so we want to make sure that as we explain this, I always make it sound like, hey, I'm defending this belief right now because I understand it so well. Because I think that's really when you know if something is true or not, is when you understand it so well that you can actually defend it and explain it so clearly. But anyway, so what they'll say is they'll say, "We'll see, since we are the temple, that we should not disgrace the temple in any way. Disgrace this temple of God, which is our bodies. We shouldn't disgrace that temple in any way, shape, or form." And so immediately in their mind, they're thinking a tattoo is a type of disgrace of that temple. So Christian, what would you say to somebody if they said that?
I guess I would just have to go to the point of what? I'll just be like, yeah, they would probably just X me. It's like America's Got Talent. But probably just be like, it just depends on what. Yeah, it just depends on what you're getting. I mean, I guess the argument I've heard is like, well, they put stained glass windows in a Baptist church. They paint their walls a certain color and all this other jazz. And I'm like, yeah, you got a point there too. So, I mean, I think it would just depend on what it is. If it's a disgrace, and I can see where they're coming from. I mean, you're putting ink in your body. Sometimes that can lead to ink poisoning and different avenues like that. I probably went more on that question than you wanted, but
Yeah,
that's
good.
probably what I would.
You know, and one of the things is, all right, if we're going to say, all right, so he's saying that we are God's temple and God's temple is holy, right? If you look in the Old Testament and you look at what they built that temple with, they didn't go out and find the scraps in the forest, you know, and find a couple of pieces of rotted wood and try to build some house and called it the temple where God resided. I mean, this was where God resided. You know, instead they went and got the most elaborate things they could. It was decorated to precision. I mean, exactly how God asked them to decorate it. You know, and it was beautiful. It wasn't some beat down old building, you know, and so when you tell them that, when I've had conversations with people about this, and we talk about that part of it, you know, it just comes back down to how they view tattoos, period. Like, it has nothing to do with what the Bible says. It has to do with their presupposition against tattoos. And so they're presupposing an idea about tattoos that most people that have tattoos today are not thinking, you know? Like, I've never met somebody that got a tattoo and said, you know what I want to do is I want to get something ugly put on my body today. And so I'm going to go get this ugly thing and I'm going to put it on my body, you know? Yeah, they don't think that. They think that the tattoo makes them look better or whatever. So, or look cooler or whatever.
I always think of the Paul Blart movie when he got drunk and he came home and had that giant eagle tattoo on his back.
Yeah, right.
I think of dumb. Sorry, I made you lose your train of thought.
No, you're good. So yeah, I mean, there's really, I mean, that's really about it. I mean, when we talk about verses about tattoos, that's pretty much all you're going to hear is those two verses because there's just not much else. As a matter of fact, there's even one verse that people who support tattoos try to use that I also think is wrong. It's a verse in Revelation, and Revelation, what is it, 19?
Yeah, 1916.
There it is.
Jesus
right
has it.
Yeah, so people will say Jesus had a tattoo, and so in Revelation 19:16 it says, and on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So basically, the argument goes is that Jesus has a tattoo on his thigh that says King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You know, but if you actually go read that chapter, man, there's all kinds of stuff. Like, what does it say? Like he had like fiery eyes. I mean, does Jesus have fiery eyes? You know. And just kind of goes to an entire hermeneutics into the book of Revelation, like, you know, is basically interpreting the symbols of the book. And so, I mean, this could be symbolic. This for one, if this is an actual tattoo on Jesus, which I personally highly doubt, but if it is an actual tattoo, it's something. It seems so obvious that it's just symbolic. Here for one, and for two, even if it was a tattoo, all right, so Jesus has a tattoo, why does that mean you should have a tattoo? You know, I don't see the connection there. I mean, we're supposed to be like Christ, I guess, but I don't know. I mean, write your title. I mean, write your title on your leg. I don't care. Pastor. I mean, I'll put pastor on my leg. I don't know.
My student pastor on my leg. Branded for life. Can't have any other job.
Yeah. The pastor on one leg and funeral guy on the other.
But so maybe our new names in heaven will be tattooed on our thighs too.
Yeah. That's the theology that Pastor wants you guys to know today. We're getting into end time now.
Oh, Lordy. Different podcast.
All right. So, Christian, you got any more thoughts on that? I mean, just the general scriptures about it. I mean, is there any other scriptures, any other arguments you've heard for or against? Or
this First Peter passage, when I was reading the Guy Questions article, it says 1 Peter 3:3-4, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of good gold jewelry or the clothing you wear. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of Gentiles and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. So this could kind of segues into the principles, but just why you got the tattoo and like not adorning your outside, more focused on your inside than your outside appearance. And so they use that argument like you shouldn't be doing that. You should be focusing on your inside appearance. And tattoos are kind of adorning yourself because most of the time you pretty much notice a tattoo pretty quick on somebody.
I was just thinking about something, but my mind blank on it. So yeah, so now we kind of do. I mean, so where do we go with this? I mean, if the Bible's not clear on something, that's what we call a gray issue of the Bible. You know, so there's a lot of gray issues. I think you know, about a lot of it has to do with drawing the line. But I was reading one of Got Questions articles, and they talked about how this is a gray area. But one of the things that happens when we come to a gray area of Scripture, and it's pretty cool that this is something that I felt like God kind of revealed to me about the Scriptures before I had even ever heard anybody else say it. But you know, it's you know, the reason, like, because I got to thinking about God, why? And I was kind of asking him, I'm like, God, why wouldn't you make things clearer? Like, why are all these things gray areas? And why aren't they clear? Because one of the things you have to do in that is it forces you, instead of going into that legalistic mindset where you have the list of do's and don'ts, it forces you to check your own heart. Because one of the things in Romans 14, we don't have time to get into, it's the whole chapter of Romans 14, where Paul is talking about how some Christians feel like it's a sin to eat meat, right? And or the you know, it's a sin to not follow the Old Testament laws about the food and stuff and animals, and but others, Christians, and Paul actually calls those weak Christians. And then the other Christians, the strong Christians, they're like, no, like I know that I'm free in Christ. Like I've been freed from the law, and that there's nothing wrong with eating these various meats and things. And so he gets into this chapter, but one of the cool things about Paul and what God was inspiring Paul to write was that Paul said, what we need to do is, you know, there are going to be some things where we wrestle with it. And so there's going to be some things that may be a sin to another person. Like I was reading one of the Got Questions articles, and the guy was like, he said, to me, I kind of doubt whether or not it's okay to have a tattoo on my body. And he said, for me, because I don't really have faith, like I'm not really 100% on this, he said, I believe it would be a sin for me to get a tattoo. And that I can respect, because he's not saying here's a biblical mandate that says you cannot get a tattoo. But what he's saying is that for me personally, I feel that it's wrong to get a tattoo. And one of the most interesting and clear illustrations of this was from you know, one of our professors. I remember him telling me this story about UFC, and I had never heard this before from anybody else. And he was like, yeah, when I watch UFC, it makes me want to fight people. And he said, so for me, he's like, that feels like a sin. Like he said, it feels wrong to watch that because it makes me kind of want to fight and get angry with people and toughen people, buck up to people and stuff. And so it was interesting. So he said, watching UFC is a sin. Of course, there's nothing inherently wrong. There's no scripture that says watching UFC is a sin, but there's Romans 14. And it says, if you have any doubt in your mind that this could be a sin, then don't do it. And Paul's main concern throughout Romans 14 and a couple other passages where he talks about the freedom that for the Christian is he's always like, listen, focus on others. You know, don't do something that's going to cause somebody else to stumble. You know, if let's say, for instance, I don't even know. I mean, it's kind of hard to give a for instance, but
yeah.
You know, but maybe like if I was, let's say right now, my church decided, hey, it is completely wrong to get a tattoo, and if you have a tattoo, it's bad. You know, well, is it really going to be helpful for me to go get a tattoo? And honestly, part of me would probably get a tattoo just because I want to irritate them. So obviously, there's some sin issues there in that circumstance. So it really makes you stop and say, okay, where is my heart at on this? Why am I doing this? Why am I making this decision? You know, and so that's I think that's the big key of it, big part of it. And so we're gonna jump into like some principles. And so bottom line for me, and I think Christian agrees, but is I'm leaning back onto the Christian freedom that we have because of Christ. We have freedom that comes with that, and then sometimes there's things that are a sin to one person and not a sin to another. But no, I don't think we can make any kind of biblical mandate. I don't think we should put it in some church bylaws or constitution that says we don't allow people with tattoos in our church or on our membership or anything like that. And we definitely shouldn't condemn people for it, for getting tattoos. I mean, I just do not think you can make a biblical case for it. But on the other hand, there are some rules and some principles you need to follow. But Christian, I'll turn it over to you if you had anything to add on there, and you want to go ahead and get us started on some principles for tattoos.
Yeah, I think you're pretty spot on. We can't mandate anything, and like Romans 14 says, difference for different people. I thought of like watching R-rated movies. There's a different level for different people. Like in a certain context, if it's a bunch of new Christians, you're not gonna show them that, or especially if like any of that was a sin to them beforehand, or that was like their addiction beforehand. So you got to kind of steer away, know who you're with, don't make people stumble. But leaning into the principles, the commercial I always think of is the guy who's eating the Snickers while he's giving this guy a tattoo, and it's supposed to say no regrets, and he ends up saying no regrets tattooed on his arm. So don't do something that you will regret later. I mean, just go to somebody reputable if you're going to get one, because there's a lot of things that could go wrong if you don't do it right. And don't get something that's a spur of the moment. I've thought about guys just trying to get their girlfriends tattooed on themselves, and I'm like, what if you're in high school? Like, what if that's not your girlfriend later? How are you going to explain that to the next girl or your wife later on? And different things like that. So just be smart.
She's just got to have the same name. That's all it is.
That's right. You can only date girls. Yeah. I'm just thinking stuff like that. I'm like, you would not want that later.
Yeah. I wanted to backtrack just for a second. The verse I was talking about Christian freedom, I had written it down but forgot to read it. 1 Corinthians 10:23, it says, everything is permissible. This is Paul again, but everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything builds up. And so that was kind of along the lines of what I was talking about earlier with our Christian freedom, but maybe some things that we are permissible to do, maybe we shouldn't. I think that happens a lot. So like Christian and I had talked about before with alcohol, like I feel like me and Christian are both permissible to drink alcohol, but I don't think it's beneficial, especially for others being in the position that we're in to drink. But if you want to listen about that, go to our alcohol podcast called Alcoholics Anonymous now.
The AA meeting.
I had a couple of principles too. One is a verse. Man, I pray this verse every day, and I'm biblically mandating all of you to do it as well. But that was sarcasm. But I mean, I definitely would highly suggest praying this verse. But it's 1 Corinthians 10:31. It says, whatever you eat, whatever you drink, whatever you do everything for the glory of God. And so when you're considering to get a tattoo, when you're trying to figure out what kind of tattoo, when you're trying to, when you're doing this, and really any decisions you make, that's one of the questions you always want to ask is, am I glorifying God? And so part of my prayer every day is, God, help me to glorify you in all things, and turn away from my sin and turn towards you and glorify you today. And I think that's what we need to focus on here as we move forward and we start making decisions about tattoos and different things. And so like one thing though is like, okay, if we can get a tattoo, does it necessarily have to be a Christian tattoo? And I was almost hesitant to even call it that. Because some tattoos aren't necessarily bad, are still, okay within Christian, but when I say Christian tattoo, I'll just define it for you. But when I say Christian tattoo, I mean like a Bible verse or like a Greek word, or or like putting Jesus's name on you, or some kind of evangelistic tool on you. I've seen people do. That's what I'm talking about, a Christian thing. But a non-Christian tattoo that I would think you could still glorify God with is like, like if you got your kid's name tattooed on you, or or like, I've known parents that like their kids have some kind of health issue, and then they get this kind of scar on them, and then the parent gets the same scar tattooed on them, like stuff like that. That's not necessarily a Christian tattoo, and there's obviously not necessarily anything wrong with it. And so that's one of my principles is just to think about that. Is this going to bring glory to God? But I would definitely not get anything that goes against Christian principles. Don't go and get some quote from the Quran and tattoo it on your arm. Get something that at the very least is honoring to God. But like getting something that just looks cool, as long as it's not like demonic or anything. I mean, I think you're all right. I think you're good to do that. But I would definitely take it into some, just seriously consider whatever your decision is. Another thing is maybe consider getting if you're going to get a tattoo, get something that you could, evangelize with, some kind of evangelism tool, something that will, people ask, hey, what is that? And you can tell them, well, this actually is a cross, and it represents Jesus Christ and what he did from, died. You can, all kinds of things you can go with, all kinds of ways you can go with that. And another thing is, one of the things to consider, especially if you're younger, you're not working yet, is that a lot of jobs still to this day still will not hire you if you have noticeable tattoos. And sometimes they'll kind of hire you, but they'll ask you to cover it. And so like if you get a tattoo sleeve, you may have to wear some kind of cover over that tattoo sleeve. So I would be careful with that. Like if you're going to get a tattoo, upper arm, chest, back, something like that, something, you could easily cover. And that's just a practical thing. That has nothing to do with Christianity. It's just a practical thing just for life. I would just be careful with that. And it can also, I think it can also still hurt your work ethic a little bit, or not your work ethic, but it can hurt how people view your work ethic. And because a lot of people still have that mentality that it is kind of disrespectful, and like against the flow. And so, it kind of, it's kind of people still judge book by their covers. And so I would definitely take that into consideration too. Especially as far as getting jobs and living life and things like that. I think the rest of these, Christian, maybe that you might have added on. And of course, we need to talk about, if you want to get that one started, about getting a tattoo to irritate somebody.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the times that was the original reason. Teenagers, especially, they just wanted to spite their parents, or you get a little older and you are against your parents for their strict upbringing, or they hate tattoos, so you're like, how can I irritate them? Just like we do to our siblings. And you're like, I'm going to get a tattoo. Meanwhile, that's a pretty permanent irritation of somebody. So, I mean, I don't think you definitely don't want to do it, because like 1031 says we need to honor God in everything that we do. And so I think motive matters. Why are you getting that tattoo? What's it for? So I think that matters, because if it's to spite someone, I don't think you can biblically back spiting someone as not a sin. So you need to watch your motive, because God cares about the heart, and he cares about why we do the things that we do. And then I've heard a lot of people and seen like a lot of examples of it, that tattoos can be very addictive. Once you get one, I've heard plenty of people say, once you get one, you'll want another. And like people that I know, they're like, that's not going to happen. Then they got one, and then they're asking their spouse, like, oh, can I get another? It's like, you just said that was going to be your only one. They're like, yeah, I know. But and it's like, I don't know what controls that, how that is, but.
Interesting.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people say that.
Yeah,
I don't mental thing.
I mean, personally, for me, I've never heard that, so that's interesting to even think about that. I mean, I guess I've heard people say it, but they're just kind of like joking around and stuff. But maybe there's something serious to that.
Yeah, something they ain't, man. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, so I've heard that. I mean, I don't know how far you can throw that, but I mean, they're expensive, so be wise with your money. Be good stewards with it. And I like the way Got Questions kind of ended their article, and they just said these things should be guided by biblical principles and done in love. And so, do everything in love, especially how, why, and what your tattoo is should be done not against biblical principles and done in love. The whole reason for it, and we'll get into the honoring your parents' side when we talk about the age that it's appropriate to get a tattoo.
Yeah,
so.
And I wanted to. We had a couple questions. Oh, let me set my page. Christian, if you want to go ahead and get into the first question, I'm going to scroll back through and try to find that post again.
So we got, what if you already have a sinful tattoo? So I think there's different views on that. One of them is you can use it as an opportunity to talk about your new creation, because some of them can be interesting. They're like, all right, a lot of people with tattoos get asked, what's the story behind that? And you can talk about where you were at and then lead them to the gospel in that. So anything God can redeem and be used for good. And then
I was going to say, what would you consider? I don't know. It's going to be hard to give a specific example, but what would you consider if somebody got a sinful tattoo?
What's the definition of sinful?
Like I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a specific example. Like, okay, I've got one just popped in my head. Like I know somebody that right now this person is anti-Christian, hates God, wants nothing to do with Jesus. Blah blah blah. I'm just kidding. But like this person literally has a false god tattooed on one arm and another false god tattooed on. These are Egyptian gods, one on each arm, and like, and I always thought about that. I'm like, if that person got saved, man, they would. If Jesus really changed their heart, and they had these false gods tattooed on their bodies. I mean, giving praise. This is like literally just giving praise to a false god, two false gods. And, I would consider that a sinful tattoo. Obviously, I would never, ever say it's okay for a Christian to get a false god tattooed on their body. And so I'm like, all right, if that person got saved, man, like if God changed their heart, then I think it would really wreck them. I mean, it would wreck their souls. And so what do you do in that circumstance? And I've had another guy, I didn't really catch what his tattoo was, but he was noticeably embarrassed by it. I don't know if he was embarrassed because of what it stood for, or I don't know if he was embarrassed just because he had it, or what the issue was, but he was definitely embarrassed. And that was just kind of shocking to me. I mean, it didn't look like anything bad to me, but what do you do in that circumstance? If I mean, that's usually what happens, or maybe an immature Christian gets a tattoo that's kind of wrong or whatever. So that's kind of my. I guess that's kind of how, or at least examples of how I would do it. But I guess the definition would be more like just anything that does that clearly goes against God. Not only doesn't glorify him, but actually goes against him. So I don't know.
Yeah, something glorifying something other than God. No way. I guess in that instance, you could like get a tattoo of a red X over those tattoos, and then use that as a witnessing opportunity.
Right.
Which could be cheaper than the surgery, because the other option is to get the laser surgery, which is, they said, anywhere from $500 to $2,000, depending on how big your tattoo is, I'd assume the colored ink might be a little harder than the black, or vice versa, to get out.
Yeah.
But they call it like Q laser or something. And I don't know how much insurance would cover of that, or if they would cover any, or anything along that matter. Or your other option is just to keep it covered. And depending on the tattoo, that might be a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's
And another question we were wanting to discuss too is specifically me and Christian are youth pastors, and I was telling Christian I've had youth. I don't know about the church I'm at now, but definitely before, and just living life. I've seen and heard teenagers getting tattoos, and kind of got me thinking, okay, what age would it be appropriate to get a tattoo? And listen, like I said, we're in a gray area of Scripture. I mean, we're trying to base all this on at the very least biblical principles. So that's another question to consider. And really, there's not a clear-cut answer. It's for one, if you're a teenager and your parents say no, you can't get a tattoo. For one, if you get a tattoo, it's illegal. I don't think Christian and I found any state where anybody that's a minor under 18 years old can get a tattoo without their an adult signing off on it. Without a parent's, I don't know if it's an adult or actual parent had to do it, but
parental consent, I think, is most of them I saw. That'd be against the biblical principle of honoring your father and mother.
Right. And so that's a pretty clear cut case. For one, don't break the laws of the land, and for two, honor your father and mother. And then the other thing is, okay, what if you're the parent and the parent's like, hey, my kid wants a tattoo. I don't have any problem with tattoos. So what do I do? And for that, it's like, for one, you need to pray about it. Pray to God, because this is something that's going to be interpersonal with you. It's something that you need to pray about with your spouse, and figure out what God says is okay. And but my suggestion, I say all that's the principles. My suggestion is that a kid waits until they're 18, because or even a little bit later than that. I mean, if you're 18, 19 right now, listen, maybe you do need to wait a couple more years to get a tattoo. I don't know. But and I'm not saying that if you're 18, you're sinful if you get a tattoo, or it's wrong. This is literally just my suggestion. Just because it's just something that you're going to have on your body probably for the rest of your life. So I would just be careful about what you get and different things like that. Make sure it's well thought out. And maybe the older you are, the better and more mature you are, the better you're going to be at making that decision. So that's just a couple things to consider. Is maybe wait until after they're 18. That way they can kind of make the decision on their own. They're an adult now. But if you're a parent and your kid wants a tattoo and they're older or whatever, I mean, listen, that's your prerogative. There's nothing sinful if you let your 16-year-old kid get a tattoo. If anybody says there is, I mean, then tell them via my email. We'll have them on the podcast and figure out what's wrong with them.
Tell them they're wrong.
Yeah, you're wrong. Next, no. It's just there's nothing inherently or there's nothing biblically wrong with that at all. Okay, it's just your own prerogative, what God is telling you, what God is convicting you of. But I know my personal conviction is, like with my kids, like I'd prefer they wait until they're 18, so that way they can make their own decisions about it. And at that point, they're an adult and they can make their own decisions, and hopefully they're mature enough to make wise choices. And, and of course the legal age for a tattoo in 50 states is 18. And so, like I said, anything before that is illegal without an adult sign off. And then in some states, it is illegal. You can't even have an adult sign off on it, and you just can't get a tattoo at all till you're 18. But definitely think there's some wisdom in that. But yeah, so I just wanted to, Christian, if you wanted to go through anything else on that, then I've got some comments from Facebook to close this out.
All right. Do you want to kind of end with our own opinions, or do you want to hit the comments first and end if we would get a tattoo? That might be something fun. If we got a tattoo, what would it be?
You could get me in trouble.
What are you going for your tattoo?
Allie's gonna hear this and she's gonna make me go get one. Speaking of Allie, she was first comment on here, and she commented. This was February 8th. I made this post, so we're recording this on the 19th. And also, by the way, this is releasing on Easter Sunday, so happy Easter, everybody! Go get a tattoo. So Allie said, obviously asked my wife, and she said, my thoughts, but a laughing face emoji. She's actually got 2 tattoos. She's definitely not against them. Our friend Austin Pounds, he said, can a Christian? I said, the post says Christian and I will discuss whether the Bible allows for tattoos in our next podcast. What are your thoughts? Maybe we'll share them on air. And our friend Austin Pounds, he said, yes, Christians can get tattoos, but only if they are C.S. Lewis quotes. Probably the funniest response. Tamara Kunn, she said, but then we'd have to talk about piercings. And of course, we were like, well, sure, we could do that. Because, honestly, if we did a whole other podcast on piercings, we would literally just copy and paste a lot of the stuff over to that. So it kind of go hand in hand, I think. Friend of mine, Corey, she said just blatantly, I don't think they're a problem. She's a very well thought out Christian. And my dad's always been against tattoos, and probably the reason why I don't have one today, because he's kind of given me a distaste in my mouth for him. But my dad said, his name's Ray Jenkins. He said, "Oh, my mind is racing, but I'll sit this one out until the verdict is in." So once we release the podcast, I'll tell him the verdict is officially in, Dad. We have figured it out. It is not sinful to get a tattoo. So, and then him and Corey were joking around about it. So, listen, thank you guys for commenting. Keep sharing your thoughts. One of the things about us is, we like having guests on. Listen, it is extremely difficult for Christian and I to schedule a time for a guest, but we see comments and we can have good discussions. That's when we're like, okay, maybe this is somebody that can come on the podcast, because we don't want we're not going to let somebody come on here if they can't handle themselves in this kind of setting. Especially if you get on here and disagree with us, because, it can get pretty intense, when we disagree. And so we want to make sure that you can handle it. None of us are going to try to kill each other, but yeah, thank you guys for commenting. Like I said, 90% of Christians today, just 90% of the Christians I've been around would probably not say that it's sinful to get a tattoo. There's a small portion that would, small portion. There's a lot of them in that portion, but it's still a small portion of the entire church body. So, but the mass majority of Christians are kind of on board with this. I think the biggest debate is more on what can you and can't you get a tattoo of. I think just spending some time going through some examples and discussing that might maybe make its own good podcast too. So I'll go ahead, or Christian, if you want to give your closing thoughts, and then I can go after you.
Yeah, I think we gave you what the Bible says about it. These couple of verses to just go home, ponder about, pray about, and see where God leads you. What's your conviction for tattoos? And we've learned that we can't really push our convictions on somebody else because God convicts us in different ways. And so you can learn a lot from somebody's tattoos, and you can tell a lot of their story, maybe of how they became a Christian. So use everything that you do for the glory of God. And personally, I would get a tattoo possibly if I wasn't afraid of needles, but I'm afraid of pain and needles. So I tend to shy away from anything like that. And as far as a Southern Baptist pastor, they're getting a lot better about it, but most of the time they do not like pastors to have tattoos. And so to just refrain from anything separating me from that, probably wouldn't get one. But they look pretty cool. So
I've always kind of been against them. They're not, like, personally, like I said, not from a biblical standpoint. Just personally, it's just never really appealed to me. Like I said, it's probably because my dad put a distaste in my mouth for tattoos, but Yeah, it's never appealed to me. And just like alcohol, like I've never struggled with alcohol, never wanted to drink alcohol. It's just, I mean, thankfully, it's just kind of like that stuff's just kind of natural for me. So it's not something I really have to fight against. My wife loves tattoos, and she's got two, and they look pretty cool. But it's just like a personal thing for me. I just don't know. I have a hard time, like even if I just get sticky or get something on my skin, like it just irritates me to no end. So I couldn't even imagine if I had something.
Scratch your tattoo.
Yeah, I've been trying
Oh,
to scratch my tattoo off, and it would take me years to even figure out what kind of tattoo to even get, because I'd be so indecisive about it. So and then I'm sure I'd probably be nervous too once the needle started getting close to me. But but at the end of the day, I mean, we said this multiple times, but there is nothing biblically wrong with getting a tattoo. And if you're a Christian, you can get one. But remember the principles. Try to honor God with it. Use your tattoos for evangelism if you can, but just make sure it's not something that's going to dishonor God. Make sure you're not doing it out of spite. Make sure you're honoring your parents with it, different things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's. I think this has been a good discussion. I think this is, I think it's gone deep enough, at least in a general sense, that this could give you at least some food for thought, and maybe some responses to people who are still against them. Like when they quote those two verses we talked about. And if there's other ones out there that people share with you, let us know so we can address them. I mean, even if we just make a short about, some scriptures or whatever. We could do that too. So, but yeah, just keep us updated. Talk to us, email us, comment below. So whatever it is you need to do. And listen, one way you can help us, or a couple ways you can help us with the podcast, is if you appreciate the content, like the content, share it with somebody. Share it with somebody else that would be interested in this. If you know somebody that's maybe struggling with this idea, and or maybe somebody that is against tattoos and says that it's sinful to get a tattoo, send them this video, and tell him his name is Christian Walton, and he
just
and
don't send them my address.
he lives, yeah.
Just send them my show.
But yeah, if you like the content, listen, share it. It would really help us out a lot, just for you to share the content. And to subscribe on YouTube, and to, if you're on like Apple Podcasts, it really helps if you leave a review. And so if you'll go and just leave a 5-star review, then that would really help us out. It helps the algorithm of the podcast, where people, when they're searching for things, that the podcast will search, when it comes up, it'll be higher up on the list, because of the reviews and stuff of the podcast. So just a couple ways you can help with that. And another way to help too is just email us. Let us know what you think. Any other questions or concerns or whatever. We'll look at those and discuss those. And listen, we're always looking for people to come on the podcast. So if you're listening to this, you're like, you know what, I'd like to come on and discuss this with you. There's plenty of things we could discuss. And not only that, maybe there's somebody, maybe it's not you that needs to come on the podcast, but maybe somebody that would be good for the podcast. We'd love to connect with them. We're always looking for people to connect with and talk with, and different things like that. And if you know anybody that's writing books and they like want to talk about a book they've written or whatever, I know Trent's done that with us a couple of times. He writes he writes up these pamphlets, these little booklets, and likes to come on and discuss those. So try to get some resources in Christians' hands, and so yeah, I mean, just listen. There's all kinds of things you can do. Continue to pray for us, and just guidance and direction and wisdom as we do this. And listen, we both really enjoy getting on here talking theology, but our heart is to help people, help have these discussions, help have a balance of it, because most of the content you listen to is way over here on one extreme or way over here on the other extreme. It's just crazy what you hear on the internet. And so we're trying to bring a balance and 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 we really enjoy it. But our heart and soul is about helping you guys tackle these issues, discuss these issues, and just see how to talk about things in a godly manner, and to think in a godly manner, which basically means don't be an idiot. Okay. So,
Don't be dumb.
anyways, that's my spiel. I'm done. That's my rant. Christian, you got anything to rant about?
Well, we don't have enough time for that. I'm just kidding.
Joe Biden.
No, that's Joe Biden. Oh Lord, there we go, getting canceled.
Yeah, we're canceled.
You have a tattoo? We may never know. No, I'm just kidding.
I tell you, dude, that's another podcast we should bring back up. Is it's politics season, man. Soon enough, it's going down. And I had actually went back and listened to our last one when we did church and politics, and in that, I mean, I think you and I kind of disagreed on the involvement, like how involved we should be as pastors and Christians, and I think it'd be a good discussion to get back into. But not only that, it's about time to throw out some warnings and tell people don't kill each other, don't be jerks, don't be mean.
Don't vote for that person.
Yeah. Well, see, that's where we would disagree, because I would say that, and you probably.
I mean, boiling it down, it's like don't vote for any of these people. But no, just kidding.
Yeah. Just leave. Go to another country.
Vote for Harambe.
Yeah. He got a lot of votes last session there.
Harambe and Mickey Mouse, man. They come back every year.
All right, y'all. We will see you on the next podcast. Thank you for tuning in. God bless you guys, and may God be with you as you think about this issue and pray about it. So we'll see you guys on the next podcast. God bless.
Thank you so much for watching the Grace Bond Ministries podcast or listening to the podcast. I know there's various ways that you could be listening to this right now or watching this right now, but I just want to say thank you so much. And if you would, wherever you're listening, if you're listening on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Podcast, please leave a 5-star review and write a little thing in there. If you're on Facebook, leave a comment. Let me know how this impacted you, or even any other questions or comments or concerns you may have. And also, if you have an idea or you have something you'd really want to talk more deeply about, you can always email me at gracebondministries@gmail.com. But thank you so much. Remember, for it is by grace you are saved through faith, and not of yourselves, for it is the gift of God. Thank you for listening to Grace Bond Ministries.